Welcome, everyone. Today, my guest is Guneet Bedi, Senior Vice President and General Manager of relayr. Years ago, Guneet and I used to work together at Cisco, so I'm really happy to have him on the show again and have this conversation, which I'm sure is going to be very fun. So, Guneet, welcome.
Thank you, Tony, and I appreciate you calling me. And we had so much fun at Cisco, so look forward to talking more about both relayr and my journey from Cisco to here.
Fantastic. So, Guneet, let's talk about relayr. The great company that you've been at for a while. Tell me, about the company and what is it that you provide?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, we're a Microsoft partner, very proud of it. Secondly, we're a very fast-growing industrial IoT technology company. And from a technology company perspective, we're about 300 people, fast growing in the sense doubling our revenue every year. And what's unique with us is we're a fully owned subsidiary of the largest insurance company in the world, Munich Re. So it's an interesting combination where we focus on mid-market industrial companies, just to transform their business from three or four areas, as you see the market offerings on the page. We do equipment as a service as a primary market using IoT, but very tightly couple IoT with insurance and financing. And I think that's where we found our unique spot, if you may, Tony. This allows us to really cover how we create either aftermarket bundles or equipment as a service. And what you and I have been doing in the software and hardware world for many years, why not have the industrial companies do the same in their world and create as a service revenue model? So that's what we do. From a logistics perspective, we operate in most of the Western world, so Europe and North America, and of course, co-sell and a strategic partner with Microsoft.
Excellent. Yeah, and exactly as you mentioned, Guneet, you and I have been doing IoT for over a decade. And honestly, like a lot of the discussions, have always been about technology, which kind of brings a lot of complexity with it. And what I really love about relayr is that you guys have always been focused about, providing clear business outcomes for the customers. And then the other thing that we've been really impressed with is that, you came, to us, as you mentioned, as a partner to Microsoft. You looked at our platform and services and figured out exactly what you needed to do, and were able to build your solutions on top of our Azure IoT platform, without much involvement from us. Can you tell me about that journey and what did it entail and how did you do it?
Yeah, really good question, Tony. And I think what we realized is when we started this journey 7 years ago, we actually started with a hardware solution. We called it Wunderbar, and it was like a chocolate, it was literally a chocolate with different pieces of chocolate having different sensors. And it was very exciting, very fascinating, but did not solve any business problem. So, but like you said, we did the tech worked, but about 3.5, 3-ish years ago, we decided let's focus on the insights and the outcomes. And let's actually, depend on key partners to do the heavy lifting of the piping and the technology and the IoT, from a differentiation perspective. So we made a board decision, got together and said, no more multi-cloud platform. Let's bet on one horse. We bet on you guys. And ever since, because we knew we had to do that and we were so outcome focused, we went and hired a bunch of Azure specialists. We worked with some of your teams in Germany. And I think the biggest difference for us was we were all in. So we are not trying to hedge our bets. And I think that's what I recommend in a lot of companies which do IoT, because people dabble with tech and dabble with pilots, and we say either you're in or you're out. And we took the same approach with Microsoft, saying we're all in, and let's adopt all the technologies that we have. Today, everything from device onboarding to IoT hub. Why reinvent the wheel? And I think that was the biggest success of our journey so far, that we just went all in.
Yeah, well, look, first of all, thank you so much for trusting your business with us, and I totally understand. We also have a big team, and we're constantly are innovating and adding more and more services. And if you try to do that on multiple clouds, it's very challenging. So we're glad that you're doing it with us, and we want to continue to also evolve our underlying PaaS services that makes you more successful. So that's wonderful. The other thing that's really interesting is, you guys, Relay are have been very successful positioning, IoT as a service, where it's taking the many facets of IoT that spans multiple industries, like you're saying, in the insurance company, as a, like, here's where I'm going to deliver the value, and here's how you're going to perceive the value, right? And instead of just having a technical conversation, so that is awesome. It's really fascinating. Can you maybe tell me, a little bit about, Gunit, as you're having these conversations with your customers, what are the challenges? You talk about business outcomes. So specifically, what challenges and business outcomes are you solving for, and how do you position the value to them?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Tony. And nothing speaks like an actual example. So I do have an example I wanted to use that.
Please.
Um, so this is a company called Trumpf. A lot of people know them. They're the market leaders in laser cutting machines, a German family-owned company. But what I will tell you about Trumpf is probably generic across our entire mid-market industrial, customer base. They're really good at what they do, but they sell products, like they sell point products. And they've done the same for 100 plus years, right? In this case, it's 140 years. But now what's going on is a couple of things. One, the dynamics of the market are changing with the pandemic and everything else, where supply chain is completely changing. It's more just in time, more localized versus centralized. As well as a lot of these machine builders and OEMs lose touch with the end customers because they make the machine so good that for the next 10 to 15 years, they don't need to talk to their end customers, right? And as you know, 80% or more of the total cost of ownership of equipment is actually the operating and the maintenance of the equipment. So, what we're doing with Trumpf and we're doing every customer is, how do you make them think not product, but end customer and solution first? How do you change that value game by saying, hey, actually, their customers as Trumpf don't care about laser cutting. They care about the part is ready to put in their automobile or in their aircraft, right? When they're ready to go. And if you can, or Trumpf can come in and say, I'll sell you capacity. And the uptime of the equipment, the availability of the equipment, the quality of the product is my problem. But then I want to capture more value because I'm giving you, the end-to-end suite, and I want to scale with your business. So if you have a bad month or bad, year, I won't make as much money with you. But at the same time, the true pay-per-use model, the true Rolls-Royce power by the hour, if if you're making money, you should be okay paying me more money. So I
Hmm.
think that's the transformation we're taking through this. And you would ask a question saying, why IoT or why technology? Because number one, all of this does not happen with real life data coming in from the equipment. And all of this does not happen with a human looking at a screen, but can only happen with through artificial intelligence and machine learning. And the last thing I leave you with is one of the key elements here is risk, because the risk is now all with the end customer, but Trumpf is taking a lot of the risk. And being owned by the largest insurance company, we understand risk, and we can create very interesting actuarial models with real data versus historic data. So I think that's what's going on in the transformation. What we did with Cisco, what we did with Oracles of the world, from selling databases to SaaS and routers and switches to network as a service. Why not do that laser cutting as a service? And that's exactly the transformation everybody's going through.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, Gunit. And at the core of IoT, a lot of it is risk management, right? So you have a lot of expensive assets, and people, not only they want to get the maximum output, OEE out of it, they also want to mitigate risk. And I think it's a clear way to articulate the value that they can get. I also know, like, just between us, Gunit, you and I, we've been involved in, easily, I can say, like maybe 10,000 trials and proof of concepts, of which many of them didn't go anywhere, right? And, a lot of it is because the value, the customer was uncertain about the value that they can get out of it. So they didn't either implement it properly, or they didn't invest to get the outcomes out of it. And what I really love about what you guys are doing is you're so confident in the outcomes that, as you said, like the risk insurance model, you're you're offering it, as an outcome-based solution. So now that, you're part of this, much bigger insurance company, can you maybe talk a little bit more about the financial, uh, outcomes and the benefits that the customers can expect and the way you position and sell, your products?
Yeah, absolutely, Tony. And I think this has been a great learning for me as an, old school engineer 20 years ago. Not a very good one, but how do you use risk as a benefit versus risk as a disadvantage?
Hmm.
And I'll just use a simple baseball analogy. If you go to the first base, you have to go to the first base to come back to home base. But all the pilots and all the technology elements and connecting an asset actually are important, but have to put in the be in the context that it's only the first base, right? And a lot of companies either fail because they only have their view to the first base, and second problem is what happens after that, right? And in our mind, there are a couple of steps after that to really transform a business. Be it new revenue streams, be it transformation, whatever we call it about. And number one, you have to kind of start making money with the technology, right? Which, by the way, most people stop there, right? Which we still call second base. And in our mind, the home base, since we started the company, venture back 7 years ago, was how do we share this risk and how do we align interests? How do we align interests that a Trumpf machine owner or a pump or a motor company which is selling their equipment actually cares about the end customer's business? And that's, we think, the business shared risk model or gain share model is really the home base. But for that, you need a few point products, you may call it, or a few areas of the, we call it the four-legged stool. So you need the technology, where of course we depend significantly on Microsoft to get us the underlying technology. We build some asset class focused business insights. We also don't leave our customers alone, and we kind of help them do this transition all the way from go to market to sales to how do you run agile projects, because they've been not used to running agile the way we have been. So we kind of offer the second leg of the stool as delivery. And the last two, which are very interesting, is number one, like I said, outcome warranties. And these outcome warranties can be anywhere from uptime guarantees to SLAs to equipment retrofit. So lots of different ways to kind of share that risk and transfer that risk over to someone like Munich Re who understands the risk. And the most important, I think, the last blue at the bottom of the slide is how do you make this transition without impacting your balance sheet? Because these are a couple $1 million assets, unlike
Yeah.
a $20,000 server or a $5,000 $1,000 router. So we've created very interesting off-balance sheet kind of financing models where we can take the assets off the OEM's books and create an as-a-service revenue model and create that shared risk model. So I think that's how we're doing it. At the heart of it, it's innovative financing, innovative insurance with IoT data, and then kind of giving all the capability that we've learned over the last 2 or 3 decades into the industrial world, and create a shared risk model. And that's been very successful.
That's wonderful. And this also tells me, Gunit, about the confidence that you have in the solutions and the value that you're delivering. And as you said earlier, it's all about risk, and you're sharing that risk with your, customers because of the confidence that you have in the outcomes, which is great to see. Gunit, you work across a broad range of industries, and I know you've been very selective in terms of the areas that you feel you can really guarantee that outcome, the heavy equipment, smart buildings, power systems, and so on. So are there specific factors that drive you to, create solutions or particular markets that you go after?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and Tony. I think John Chambers told us a long time ago. A lot of your strategy is what not to do versus what to do. So I think we really took that to heart. As you know, our founders also and CEOs also from ex-Cisco. And what we decided is we will only work with companies which have, or markets. I shouldn't even say companies. Markets which have inefficiencies, fragmentation, and more importantly, very critical assets, because that's where we think the value pool, we call them value pools, the value pool of unplanned downtime or the shared risk savings is the most critical. So when you look at heavy motors, pumps, CNC machine tools, elevators which move people. So I think so that's what we've been focused on, really critical assets and where there's a lot of inefficiencies in the supply chain that we can fix, and a lot of fragmentation, because otherwise there's a monopoly or a duopoly or a duopoly, whatever we call it, and it's really hard to transform business because the big giants sit there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Uh, Guneet, what advice do you have for the companies that are new to the industrial IoT? What can you offer them? How should they be thinking about relayr?
Yeah, and I think relayr, or in general, I think, Tony, it's a really good question. First, like you and I keep saying, start with the outcome. Really, where do you want to go? And I think it's a strategic decision. It's not a tactical technology decision saying, all right, I want to do as a service, or I want to, whatever you want to do, right? So I think that's number one. That really everybody should, think about starting with the outcome and then have micro goals to get there, so we don't get lost. The second big thing, which I think, which a lot of people miss, is it is a cultural shift. It is not just a technical shift, and not
It's
so
huge.
it's huge, right? And sometimes a lot of people underestimate the cultural change, and that the people may not be ready. There might actually be new people to do this. And last is nobody in the industrial mid-market or industrial world in general, B2B, has figured out the kung fu. So, find your own kung fu is what I would say, because every subscription model is different. We go from pay per use to pay by the hour to just aftermarket guaranteed bundles. So, you don't know what will work. So I think it's important to find your mojo or find your kung fu, and just try it out with the outcome in mind. So I know it's more generic, but that's what I'll give the advice to start with.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Guneet, you guys have done a great job, establishing a leadership position in the industrial IoT and this whole digital transformation that brings value, to reduce a lot of those issues that you mentioned, the fragmentation, siloed data, and so on. What do you see as the next big thing?
Yeah, it's funny. I knew you would ask that, so I actually have a slide for you. But we call it vertical value integration, and the Apples and Teslas have done that so well in the last decade, right? Where they actually go from the hardware to the operating system all the way to the service ecosystem. Tesla is a no-brainer on how they've captured the entire dealers in the service market, and with SpaceX we see the same. But we think that's the big next trend and the big next thing in IoT and manufacturing, where how do you vertically integrate, whether it's forward or backward, right? We see a lot of distributors and maintenance repair companies integrating backwards and doing manufacturing. We see a lot of companies like Trumpf taking one step forward. In fact, the vision of Trumpf is not just laser cutting as a service, but sheet metal as a service. They said, hey, you as a user shouldn't care. You want X tons of sheet metal in a certain way, we'll create it for you, and you pay the output. And then they vertically integrate and kind of even play in the commodities market for that matter, and really take the value approach. The secret, though, and the hard part, I think everybody will need to figure out, is how do you capture that value? Because for a very long time you trained your customers to say, hey, I'll compete on price and speeds and feeds and features, so you're not used to capturing that value. Now you create more value, how do you capture it? So that's why I think that's the big next trend, vertical value integration, and I hope we talk about it 1, 2, 3, 4 years from now and see some big successes there.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, and honestly it's very consistent with our forward thinking strategy as well. Like, how do we make IoT simple? How do we make it ready for the masses? And how do we make sure that the value realization is clear? The way, you start the project, the way you get into full scale production, and the way you benefit, as you go forward. And you guys have done a, masterful job of doing all three things, the simplicity, the business outcomes, and the risk sharing. Look, Guneet, I just want to say it's been great. You've always been a long-term friend, an innovator, a thinker in the IoT space. Really enjoyed, working with you, and how, we bring in solutions together, in this IoT ecosystem. And most importantly, thank you for, trusting your business with us, and being a great Microsoft partner.
Absolutely, Tony. It's been a great experience with you and the whole Microsoft team. And the message I leave everybody in this video is, if anybody is looking for a transformation to do as a service in the manufacturing industrial world, reach out. I mean, we're not perfect, but 300 of us get up in the morning very passionate on doing that. So whether it's aftermarket, as a service models, we'll be happy to help. And it's been a phenomenal journey, and it's just a start, like you say, Tony, right? So we have a lot to conquer together.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.